Hello and welcome to another edition of the Sunday Club. We are here today with Aditya Raj Kaul, contributing editor with CNN News 18, Kashmir watcher, mostly very adept and people turn to him very often for foreign affairs and, of course, geopolitics. But Kashmir is also a subject that he follows very closely. It's also connected to his own personal journey, which I'm sure Aditya will share at some point. We're actually meeting today, Aditya, because last night I was on Twitter, and you tweeted practically minutes after Mr. Rakesh Pandita was shot and being taken to hospital. So it's clear that you track this minute by minute very closely and have an extensive web of contacts in the valley. Can you tell us a little bit about the latest incident involving Mr. Pandita?
Yeah, sure, Advaita. Firstly, thank you very much, and very happy to join here with you. We've been following your personal journey, as a writer, as an activist as well, and so good to share screen with you. This is a case of Rakesh Pandita, who is actually a Kashmiri Pandit, and for last 3 decades, his family, he himself, were living in exile in Jammu.
Mhm.
But just a couple of years back, he decided that he needs to, get back into, Kashmir some way. And to reclaim those roots, he decided to join the BJP and finally, contest elections at the grassroots level and become a municipal councillor. And gradually, he became the chairperson of the municipal committee in Tral in South Kashmir's Avantipura. You would know that Tral is the same place where the dreaded terrorist Burhan Wani came from, who was killed in 2016. And we saw a summer of, a very unfortunate summer again in the Kashmir Valley.
Yes.
So this is the same Tral area. Yesterday evening, a little after 6 p.m., he had gone to visit his friend's house there in Tral. They were sitting together, having a chat. And that's when three terrorists barged in and pumped bullets in his body. He almost died on the spot. He was, there were efforts to revive him. He was taken to the hospital as well, but he couldn't survive. His friends, who was a local Kashmiri Muslim, his daughter
Yes.
also received injuries, and she is in the hospital right now. Thankfully, her life has been saved. So, Rakesh Pandita was staying in Srinagar in a hotel called the Sunshine Hotel, a room that was provided by the administration. And he had security. He had two PSOs that were given to him by the J&K police. I spoke to the Inspector General of Police of Kashmir, Vijay Kumar, who told me immediately after the incident, confirming the incident and saying that the security was provided, but unfortunately, Mr. Pandita chose not to take the security with him. So this brings me to the question of, questions to both. I wish I could ask this question to Mr. Pandita. Unfortunately, he's not alive. That was it his own mistake. Now that he's not alive, the police will have to do some answering. And did the police not follow the SOP? Because once a protectee says that he does not want protection at that particular time, it is a responsibility of the PSOs to immediately report this matter to their superiors, to the concerned SP as well. Was this done? If this was done, then what action was taken thereafter? So there seems to be some dereliction of duty as well in this particular case. And apart from that, I would tell you myself, last month I was in Kashmir for a week. And as a minority, as somebody who speaks very often against terrorism and separatism, I also feel uncomfortable. I don't feel safe in Kashmir. And once I go to South Kashmir, particularly Pulwama, Anantnag, Shopian, I become even more, I wouldn't say scared, but a little more suspicious, a little more careful, a little more, aware that I'm not safe. So similar is the case of protectees, because once they are in Srinagar, they roam around okay with security. But once they have to go to South Kashmir, they know that the men who are wearing khaki or even army personnel or others are the first target. So he may not be targeted, but if the police is targeted, he will become a victim in that process. So many people avoid taking security with them. This is the normal notion
Right.
in Kashmir. So Rakesh Pandita unfortunately became a victim of this process. Lashkar-e-Toiba claimed responsibility for this act. And just like Rakesh Pandita, there have been several earlier incidents also with the minorities, with the majority. But yes, as many of my friends in Kashmir say, that if you are a minority and then you also join the BJP, then of course you become the first target. You are the top in the priority list of the terrorists. So in the past, also last year, exactly 1 year back, I think it was the 8th of June, when Ajay Pandita, who was from the Congress party in Anantnag, was killed again brutally. At that time, the hue and cry was much more. This time, perhaps because of COVID or other circumstances, there isn't so much hue and cry all across media in India. But Ajay Pandita's death was marked with a lot of shock, protests, and questions being asked to the administration as well as to why such selective targeted killings are happening.
Mm-hmm. And there was also this incident in February of this year in Krishna Dhaba, which is a very popular eatery and is frequented by tourists and locals alike. And the young owner's son, the young son, 25 years old, was also targeted. And he was in hospital for a couple of days and eventually succumbed to his injuries. And yet again, this is seems to be, and one doesn't want to jump the gun, but it certainly seems to be like there is a sort of profiling and targeting that is going on. How true is that perception that is building now?
Well, it isn't a perception of weather. I mean, many people may claim that this is in perception, and we shouldn't bring in religion, we shouldn't bring in Islamist terror definition of it. But this is the reality. I mean, we may wear blinkers and say that there's no Islamist terror, but the reality remains that unfortunately there is. And there is a selective targeting as well, because when this attack took place in Feb, as you mentioned, on Akash Mehra in the heart of Srinagar city, and that too meters away from the UNMOGIB office, United Nations Military Observers Group of India and Pakistan. Their office is right outside the Sarovar Portico Hotel in Srinagar. And just meters away from the Sarovar Portico and UNMOGIB is the Krishna Dhaba. In fact, I will tell you that till 2016, I was a vegetarian. And the only decent place to serve vegetarian meal in the entire Kashmir Valley is the Krishna Dhaba. So I used to frequent every afternoon and evening to Krishna Dhaba. I used to stay in Sarovar Portico and then grab my meals there. And even today, for common Kashmiris, for tourists alike, this is a place, a must go. And at a time when a delegation of ambassadors from Delhi were visiting meters away again on the Gupkar Road, they were at the Lalit Hotel. This attack took place in the evening, a little after 7 p.m. And that too, when there was a huge crowd at Krishna Dhaba, suddenly couple of terrorists came in from an auto, they pumped bullets and they left. For a week, Akash fought for his life in a local hospital in Srinagar, and thereafter, unfortunately, he passed away. My exact fear, which I discussed with my friends in Srinagar, was that, this is, of course, for a fear psychosis and to convey a message. And there was a leaflet that was put out by a terror group to claim responsibility, which said that this is against the demographic change that the government of India wants to bring in Kashmir. So in a way, they said that they will not tolerate Hindus from coming to Jammu and Kashmir. So this is their aim. So when the terror groups themselves are saying that this is a selective targeting, who are we to say that this is no, let's not bring in religion, let's not call it Islamist terror? I mean, the agenda has been very clear. In fact, I was just on my CNN live half an hour back, and this question was posed to be by the anchor. And I told her that, in 1990, when the exodus and the ethnic cleansing of Kashmiri Pandits happened, the modus operandi was the same. I mean, prominent Kashmiri Pandit voices, be it poets like Sarvanand Kolpremi, be it BJP activists, the vice president of that time from JNK BJP, Tikalal Tablu, Justice, a very prominent and renowned Justice Neelkant Ganju, and several others were killed. So these were selective targetings that were happening. And it wasn't just a Kashmiri Pandit who was affiliated to BJP or the security apparatus who was being killed. I mean, Sarvanand Kaul Premi was a renowned secular person who tilted towards the left. And there were several others. Hedarnath Vanchu, who was a known communist, who was killed just because he was a Kashmiri Pandit. So, identity played a huge role in the ethnic cleansing and genocide in Kashmir. And that's what has been happening over the last few years as well. So, selective targetings every few months or a couple of times in a year, just to convey a message that Kashmiri Pandits will not be tolerated, Kashmiri Hindus won't be accepted back. On TV, PR campaigns may say that, Kashmiri Pandits are a very important and integral part of society.
Yeah.
But the reality is very different. And same is with the Sikh community as well. Last year, a BDO chairperson of the Sikh community in South Kashmir was killed. We had a policeman, a Sikh policeman who was again killed. So, unfortunately, there isn't as much reportage or debate on these circumstances because these are seen casualties in the overall context of conflict. Nobody goes into the specifics of it. That why is it happening? What kind of a message are they conveying? Is this a message to BJP? Is this a message to the ruling government? So that's what is happening. And secondly, there's a lot of frustration on Pakistan side also. Post abrogation of Article 370 on 5th of August 2019, Pakistan tried its best because they wanted not just, terrorism from exporting terrorism from Pakistan. They wanted some kind of law and order problem in Kashmir. They wanted to stoke or instigate violence in Kashmir, which they used to do very, very successfully over the years. But this time it wasn't happening because since 2017, the NIA raids have led to the collapse of the vicious circle of stone pelters, the vicious circle of separatists funding, receiving money, drug money from Pakistan and leading to this kind of violence. Also, the internet ban in Kashmir for more than a year, I think 1.5 years helped. Although I wasn't somebody who really supported this. Initially, I said, yes, for some time it's okay. But 1 year, 1.5 years is a huge, massive time. And today only I was reading a report that on India's, internet ban, the UN and international bodies and particularly media in US and UK and of course Al Jazeera and others created a huge issue. But nobody bothers that in Balochistan, in 6 districts, internet was shut down for 5 years and not a single tweet by a UN rapporteur from a UN a Human Rights Council or anybody else. So the reality is out in open. The hypocrisy has to be called out. That
I know,
I'm not somebody who is saying that internet ban should be there in J&K. I'm against it. The professionals, school students were affected majorly. But, the same thing is happening in Pakistan for years together. In POK also, Pakistan occupied Kashmir. But nobody raises any alarm bells.
And the demographic change in Pakistan occupied Kashmir. I mean, they go on about it here, but there has been a total demographic change there, very stealthily. Actually, not even stealthily; it's been done openly. And I'm glad you brought up the UN repertoire because I was reading today that they did ask the government of India to answer on some points, on some prisoners and things of that nature, but they didn't mention Rakesh Pandita, considering it just happened last night and they never ever mentioned him. So there is definitely a bias that is at play, and there is an international bias as well, not just a domestic one. I know that you were very active in this from your school years, isn't that right? In raising the Kashmiri Pandit issue and bringing it into the mainstream because there was this lack of discussion. And you've been tracking it very closely. Your family left Kashmir during that exodus in 1990, I think, was the time. I think very often, sometimes you share vignettes from that period. Like the bus ticket and things like that, which are extremely poignant. So I know it's deeply personal for you. What is it like with the Kashmiri Pandit community when these kind of incidents happen? Do they feel like they can go back? There's no Article 370. There's been change. Like you said, the NI has come down on, that stone pelting racket and the funding. But do they feel secure in terms of going back despite the lip service that is given from time to time?
See, firstly, just like you mentioned, there's an entire generation that has passed away. an entire generation which migrated, which met the exodus and had to start life from scratch outside their homeland in Jammu and Kashmir. And that entire generation waited 30 years, 32 years for some glimmer of hope that the government of the day, at that time, the Congress party, later the BJP, will do something for their return, will do something for their justice, for some kind of a restoration of faith, that something would be done for them. For, Kashmiri Pandits held the Indian flag and did not uh, ever waver. But unfortunately, that did not happen. So now there's a new generation that has come up outside Kashmir. They do not relate as much, with the common population out there. They may go there as tourists, but when they go there and see the kind of radicalization that's happening, the kind of lack of development that has been there over the last 30 years, they're surprised, they're shocked, and they certainly cannot live in such kind of an environment. Secondly, when Kashmiri Pandits go there in the interiors, they are seen as aliens. I remember that in 2013, for the first time when I went to Renavari, the place where my ancestors come from in Srinagar, very close to Lal Chowk, there was a huge crowd that, came, and they didn't speak to me. They just kept watching me. That who's this person? And, I almost felt that, I'm not human. I'm some superhuman or somebody who's just landed here from moon. And they're just trying to see who this person really is. And does this person, will he cause some threat or whatever?
Wow.
So this happens a lot. And secondly, as somebody pointed out, I was on a Clubhouse discussion and we were discussing this same topic this afternoon. We had a huge crowd of about 1,000 people on Clubhouse discussing this. And somebody pointed out that, the local population hasn't stayed with the Hindus. They don't know much about diversity. They don't know much about the exact secularism that is actually written in the Constitution of India. They do not know what staying together or sharing things, etc. is. So when they see Kashmiri Pandit, then they're surprised that, you can also speak the same Kashmiri that I speak, and perhaps better. How can this happen? Sometimes with food, you could prepare a similar kind of food or whatever. So unfortunately, that has happened. Secondly, on the return of Kashmiri Pandits, I personally do not feel that the return of Kashmiri Pandits is going to happen, at least in the next 1 decade.
Oh, you don't?
I very firmly believe that it's not going to happen. And secondly, I believe that as Kashmiri Pandits, we have come to terms with that fact. It's not going to happen. And so it's firstly because of the radicalization. We are not going to jump into violence. We are not going to jump into an area where fire is still being extinguished. There's been fire burning for 30 years. It's still being extinguished. And we don't want to be victims again by jumping into it. But in the larger interest, we'll sacrifice our return. But we want restoration of democracy, restoration of peace, and to be, the government of the day or the security forces to act tough against terrorism, against radicalism. So we can push our rehabilitation to another 10 years or 15 years. And because let's face it, it's
but that's going to, Aditya, that's going to be yet another generation then that's going to grow up outside of Kashmir, right?
It is going to be, and the return will be such. The immediate return will happen in 2 phases only. One, a very minuscule minority of people who have lack of resources, who do not have money, unfortunately, for instance, in Jagati camp in Jammu, where they do not have resources, they do not have jobs, and they plead before the government that jobs will be given. They will jump to the opportunity and go back. But again, with them also, you give them enclosed space,
settlements, etc., which are kind of protected.
But every time there's a threat, every time there's a terror attack, they get scared and they come back. So this entire funda of a PM employment package hasn't been really successful. So one is this section will go back. Second, the ultra rich among the Kashmiri Pandits will buy land, will buy cottages in places like Pahalgam, in Gulmarg, in Srinagar also, and they may make it as a summer retreat and go back in sometimes. I know some affluent politicians, industrialists among the Kashmiri Pandits who do that. So these 2 sections in a very ultra minuscule way will certainly go back. But that's not really a return that we are seeking or looking at. The ultimate return will only happen when we do not speak about a demographic change. When we say that it's not just Kashmiri Pandits who have to return, but anybody who stays in India and wants to buy property there, stay there, can do that freely. And secondly, also, the kind of infrastructure development that Kashmir really requires needs to be there. So a lot of steps need to be taken, but unfortunately, return of Kashmiri Pandit is something that I do not see. One glimmer of hope that I have is that I was somebody who believed that Article 370 abrogation should happen, but will never happen. It happened. Just 4 months before Article 370 abrogation, somebody at the top told me that this is going to happen. And I almost, rubbished.
Yeah.
And this was somebody really at the top and who said with, a great amount of confidence. And Mazakia taur pe, he told me that you change my name if it doesn't happen. And I told that person that, BJP has been saying this for over 40 years. And, it's been on your manifesto for 30 years. It's certainly not going to happen. He said, whatever BJP says or doesn't say, but this is going to happen. And the same person called me early morning on 5th of August at 7 a.m. and said, look, I was saying that it's going to happen, and it happened. So I may not be able to reveal details right now, but I will.
When you write your book.
Write about it. And there were only 5 people who actually knew what's going to happen and how it's going to happen at that particular time. So I feel that step has given me confidence that even the impossible can happen. If you have the determination, if you have the skill, if you have the resources, and if you have the political will to do it. So the return of Kashmiri Pandits might happen, not immediately, but right now for the government of India or even the security apparatus, that should not be the priority. The priority is much different. And one of the priorities that I tell you, and we can go forward with it, is radicalization.
I was just going to come up with that because I was reading that now the Pakistan has adopted a new kind of strategy wherein they train the teenagers, and maybe a day or two of training, and then let them intermingle and go back to their lives and friends and family and all of that. But they have been radicalized and they have been sort of geared up for this kind of conflict. How true is that? And what about the Indian state or the government's focus on, de-radicalization and, handling this radicalization? Because like you mentioned, Burhan Wani, there was, of course, Indian mainstream media also that played its part in trying to make him some sort of tragic hero by talking about his family and all of those things. And then on the other hand, of course, you had, the local Kashmiri youngsters who were very kind of agitated and taken up with his cause and his persona, so to speak. So what do you think is the way forward in this situation?
See, firstly, I always say, and, ad nauseum, I've been repeating this, and every think tank event that I attend, every panel discussion, even in my reportage, that, one has to take a call. After 370 abrogation, you have to now have a consistent policy. One, you have to do an audit of the mistakes that you have committed over the last 70 years. Be it from politicians, be it from security forces, be it from intelligence apparatus, be it from former raw chiefs or anybody. The blunders that you have committed need not be repeated. That will only happen if that very fair and transparent audit happens. Secondly, you have to decide that every year you kill more than 200 terrorists. That has been the record continuously over the last 30 years. Sometimes it reduces to 140, 150. Sometimes it is 250, 260. There are medals that are given, honors that are given. Unfortunately, many security forces lay down their life for the country. Very emotionally powerful stories that have come out, like Umar Fayaz, Aurangzeb, Muhammad Ayub Pandit, several others. J&K police, unfortunately, in many times becomes the unsung hero in this entire process and do not get as much credit that they should. But we need to take a call now that do we only kill terrorists or do you want to kill terrorism? Do you only want to eliminate radicals or do you want to eliminate radicalism? Do you want to only shatter the corrupt system that has been prevailing and over the last 3 decades, or do you want to shatter and eliminate and completely end the ecosystem that has been helping and nourishing terrorism, separatism in the valley? So the government of India, the security apparatus has to take that call.
But what
That
about
call, yeah.
Yeah, one quick just to interject here, and I hope you will elaborate on that. But what about the narrative building that happens even in mainstream media, which fuels this to a large extent and has in the past?
Absolutely.
If
You're
you can cover
very,
that as well.
very bang on. That's why I said ecosystem. So ecosystem isn't just the politicians. Ecosystem isn't just National Conference or PDP or their leaders pandering to soft separatism over the years. It's also the media. It's also anyone who supports, legitimizes separatism or anti-India thought process in the Kashmir Valley. You check and see the reportage or the columns or the editorials that were written by Greater Kashmir and Rising Kashmir and Kashmir Times over the last 3 decades in Kashmir Valley, particularly through the years of 2007 to 2017. These 10 years.
Aditya, can we do English? Our viewers are asking for a little bit of Hindi also. So
Absolutely, absolutely.
और हिंदी
अगर कश्मीरी में भी बोलेंगे तो मैं कश्मीरी में भी बोल सकता हूँ।
क्योंकि वो मांग रहे हैं। हाँ जी।
तो मैं ये कह रहा हूँ कि एक इकोसिस्टम, एक पूरा एक चक्र व्यू जो है आतंकवाद के इर्द गिर्द बना है जम्मू कश्मीर में, और इस चक्रव्यूह में कौन कौन है? सिर्फ राजनेता ही नहीं है, सिर्फ पीडीपी और नेशनल कॉन्फ्रेंस के लोग ही नहीं है, सिर्फ वो लोग नहीं है जो आतंकवाद को या चरमपंथी भावना को आगे बढ़ाते थे। वो लोग भी हैं मीडिया से, पत्रकार कश्मीर में बैठे हुए, जो लोग आतंकवाद को एक आइडियोलॉजिकल तौर पे बढ़ावा देते थे। आप देखिए ग्रेटर कश्मीर, राइजिंग कश्मीर और विभिन्न जो अखबार कश्मीर से निकलते थे, और 2007 और 2017 के बीच में कैसी रिपोर्टाज, कैसे एडिटोरियल इन्होंने लिखे, कैसे वो आतंकवाद को, सेपरेटिज्म को और भारत के खिलाफ भावना को और ज्यादा उजागर करते थे। तो ये इकोसिस्टम पर जो 2017 के बाद हमने प्रहार देखा है, हमने एनआईए, नेशनल इन्वेस्टिगेटिव एजेंसी का जो टेरर फंडिंग का जो केस था, हुर्रियत कॉन्फ्रेंस के खिलाफ, जेकेएलएफ के खिलाफ, यासीन मलिक और बाकी लोगों के खिलाफ, उसमें हमने बहुत बड़ी अनप्रेसिडेंटेड कार्रवाई देखी है। सो इट हैज बीन अ वेरी अनप्रेसिडेंटेड पैराडाइम शिफ्ट पॉलिसी ऑफ द गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया। और सरकार ने 2017 के बाद ये तय कर लिया कि अब बस हो गया है और हमें कार्रवाई करनी जरूरी है। लेकिन अब हम उस क्रूशियल स्टेज पे हैं 4 साल के बाद कि क्या हम वो पुराने मिस्टेक्स जो कमिट करते थे वहां पर फिर से पहुंच जाए। जैसे कि पीडीपी बनी 2000 के आसपास, पीडीपी बनी 2000 वर्ष के आसपास, और अब हमने देखा पिछले कुछ सालों में पीडीपी ने क्या किया। पीडीपी की जो अध्यक्ष है महबूबा मुफ्ती, उन्होंने कहा कश्मीर में एक भी कंधा नहीं बचेगा झंडा उठाने के लिए, झंडा फहराने के लिए, और हमने देखा 370 के बाद कुछ भी नहीं हुआ। फारूक अब्दुल्ला ने बोला कि मेरा नाम बदल देना अगर 370 कोई भी हटा पाया, ना उनका नाम बदला, और फारूक अब्दुल्ला जो है बिल्कुल गुपकार रोड पर अभी भी रहते हैं आराम से। तो आई थिंक व्हाट हैज हैपेंड इज कि जो कश्मीर के राजनेता हैं वो दिल्ली को पिछले 30 साल से नहीं, पिछले 60 साल से 70 साल से बेवकूफ बना रहे हैं। और ये बेवकूफ ये बना रहे हैं कि आपके पास दिल्ली के लोगों, आप ये सुन लें कि हम ही हैं कश्मीर में, हम ही हैं जो आपकी बात यहाँ रख सकते हैं, हम ही हैं जिसकी वजह से जम्मू कश्मीर भारत के साथ है, हम ही हैं जिसकी वजह से झंडा यहाँ पर फहरा रहा है। ये भावना और ये जो मैं कहूँगा गलत धारणा वो फैला रहे थे, भ्रम फैला रहे थे, वो 2017 के बाद और खासकर अगस्त 2019 के बाद खत्म हो गया। और ये कश्मीर के लोगों ने भी देखा, क्योंकि आप खुद ही समझिए, अगर कहीं पर भी दुनिया भर में राजनेता अरेस्ट होते हैं 1 साल के लिए या नजरबंद होते हैं, कुछ तो प्रोटेस्ट होगा, कुछ तो लोग बाहर आएंगे, अपने एक्टिविस्ट तो बाहर आएंगे। कब तक बर्दाश्त करेंगे? आप रशिया में देखिए, जो ऑपोजिशन के लीडर हैं और पुतिन ने एकदम जो है कार्रवाई की है, लेकिन तब भी हजारों की तादाद में लोग बाहर आ रहे हैं और प्रोटेस्ट कर रहे हैं। तो कश्मीर में ऐसा क्या हुआ कि उमर अब्दुल्ला की नेशनल कॉन्फ्रेंस के लोग या महबूबा मुफ्ती की पीडीपी के लोग, एक भी बंदा बाहर नहीं आया और कहा कि नहीं, हम प्रदर्शन नहीं करेंगे, कुछ भी नहीं करेंगे। तो मुझे लगता है कि ये जो बेवकूफ बनाने की साजिश कश्मीर के तौर पर, गुपकार रोड के तौर पर चलती थी, ये मेचुनाबूत हो गई 2019 के बाद। लेकिन अब जो है, द बॉल इज इन कोर्ट ऑफ द रूलिंग गवर्नमेंट नाउ, विच इज द बीजेपी, बिकॉज नाउ it is the governor's rule. Governor Manoj Sinha is taking care of things out there. So the government has to decide that what kind of consistency do they want. Do they want to plant politicians and have the same stopgap arrangement, or do they want healthy politics and no tolerance towards any kind of separatism and terrorism? So
But
we'll
can there be healthy politics जब भारतीय जनता पार्टी के हैं राकेश पंडिता, उनकी हत्या ऐसे खुलेआम हो, तो ये ऐसे डर का माहौल जो हम कहते हैं बनाया गया है वहां पे,
see, Advaita,
माहौल में हो सकता है क्या?
I'll be a devil's advocate. मैं आपको ये भी कह दूं कि बीजेपी के लोगों की तो चलिए अभी हत्या हो रही है, पहले भी हुई है, ऐसा नहीं है। लेकिन बीजेपी जो है कश्मीर में उतनी एक्टिव नहीं है जितनी पिछले 2 साल में थोड़ी बहुत हुई है। और अभी भी मुझे लगता है कि कश्मीर में अगर वो चुनाव लड़ेंगे तो ऐसी अभी सिचुएशन नहीं है कि वो चुनाव कुछ भी सीटें जीत सके। मतलब चुनाव जीतना तो बहुत बड़ी बात है, कुछ सीटें भी वो कश्मीर में जीते तो ये ऐसी सिचुएशन अभी नहीं है। ये मैं असेंबली चुनावों की बात कर रहा हूँ। लेकिन हमें ये भी नहीं भूलना चाहिए कि नेशनल कॉन्फ्रेंस के और पीडीपी के भी एक्टिविस्ट हैं जिनको मारा गया है। तो पिछले कई सालों से ये चलता रहा है, 370 के एब्रोगेशन के बाद भी और उससे पहले भी बहुत सारे ऐसे एक्टिविस्ट हैं जिनको पर्टिकुलरली साउथ कश्मीर में जो है आतंकवादियों ने मार दिया। तो ये कार्रवाई जो है, तभी मैं बार बार कहता हूं कि whoever represents Indian democracy in Jammu and Kashmir, particularly in Kashmir, is an easy target of the terrorists, and it will happen. So that's why we've seen particularly politicians, और क्योंकि पिछले 2 साल 3 साल में सरपंच के चुनाव हुए, बीडीओ के चुनाव हुए, डिस्ट्रिक्ट डेवलपमेंट काउंसिल के चुनाव हुए, तो इसलिए उनको टारगेट किया जा रहा है मैसेज कन्वे करने के लिए कि वी विल नॉट लेट द इंडियन डेमोक्रेसी थ्राइव इन कश्मीर. So it will unfortunately happen. Once you have decided that you have to bring in democracy in a terror-infested region, in a conflict area, this is the price you pay, unfortunately. So it will happen. It's just that the security system has to be robust. The sense of security has to come also from the government of India, from the highest levels, to those people who are proud Indians in Kashmir, who say that we are proud Indians, who want to come out and speak out, who want to even protest, who want to even work, who want to build infrastructure, development in Kashmir. But their only problem is that tomorrow if something happens, who will take care of us? Who will give us sense of security? So that sense of security has to be given.
हाँ, क्योंकि जब जम्मू एंड कश्मीर की पुलिस फोर्स के जैसे रिक्रूटमेंट ड्राइव होता है तो इतनी लंबी लाइन होती है वहां पे, तो पता चलता है कि वहां पे कि आम जनता जो है वो भी इतने भारत के खिलाफ नहीं है जैसे दर्शाया जाता है, नॉट टू द एक्सटेंट दैट इज प्रोजेक्टेड. पर आपने ये माहौल की बात की एंड ऑफ कोर्स द शैडो ऑफ टेरर, और इसमें नशीले पदार्थों का जो कारोबार है, इसकी भूमिका क्या है इन टर्म्स ऑफ फंडिंग टेरर इन द कश्मीर वैली?
बहुत ज्यादा है, बहुत ज्यादा है. आप पहले तो ये क्रॉस बॉर्डर बहुत ज्यादा चलता था, अभी क्योंकि वो बंद हो गया कुछ टाइम से तो इसलिए थोड़ा सा कमी आई. और जो ओवरऑल ट्रेड के थ्रू टेरर फंडिंग होती थी उसमें भी बहुत ज्यादा कमी आई. लेकिन अभी भी लोकली जो है ड्रग्स मुहैया कराए जा रहे हैं, लोकली ग्रोथ भी होती है ड्रग्स की नॉर्थ कश्मीर में, साउथ कश्मीर में. और बहुत सारे इसमें हो सकता है एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन के लोग भी निचले लेवल पर इन्वॉल्व हों और इसको बढ़ावा दे रहे हों. तो बार बार हम तभी देखते हैं कि पर्टिकुलरली नॉर्थ कश्मीर के हंदवारा, कुपवारा से और साउथ कश्मीर के अनंतनाग से कि बहुत बार जो है ड्रग्स बरामद होते हैं और साथ ही जो है बहुत सारी गिरफ्तारियां भी होती हैं. मेरे एक मित्र थे जिनका नाम था राजू, अर्जुमंद उनका फॉर्मल नाम था, और वो एक एक्टिविस्ट थे बारामुल्ला में. और मैं बहुत बार उनको कश्मीर जाता था, उनको मिलता था, एंड ही वाज वेरी वोकल, एंड समटाइम्स आई यूज्ड टू टेल हिम कि यू नीड टू काम डाउन अ लिटिल बिकॉज़ यू स्टे इन
फार्मेसी
बारामूला।
की दुकान चलाते थे,
बिल्कुल
समथिंग लाइक दिस,
बिल्कुल
आप,
बिल्कुल।
मुझे याद है।
हाँ, बारामूला की मेन जो मार्केट है, मेन हाईवे पर, वो उनका फार्मेसी का दुकान था, एंड ही वाज फ्रॉम ओल्ड बारामूला टाउन, and I'd met him last in 2017. But 2 years back, somebody just entered his shop because there was a shutdown, and he was the only person who had opened his shop. So he went inside and pumped bullets in his body, and he died on the spot. So, and Arjuman is somebody who was campaigning against drugs, who was campaigning against this terror and drug nexus that was funding terrorism. So my concern has been that till now they do not know who killed Arjuman. So I feel that there is a huge drug lobby. I'm not sure if politicians are involved or somebody else is involved, but Arjuman's killers perhaps are still out there and open. And there's a huge drug problem in the Kashmir Valley, which is funding terrorism. And I came to know about this because last month I was in Kashmir and I went to Anantnag, where I was told that there's a huge drug nexus that is still happening, and local criminals and local drug small warlords are, being pumped in to fund terrorism. So this is still going to be a major problem and a challenge for the government that they have to look into.
Madhu Sharma, one of our viewers, has written that very sad how terrorism succeeds in killing innocent lives. I'm so glad that the speaker is educating all the listeners so well. कभी कभी हमारे लिए जो है ना, इट बिकम्स अ स्टेटिस्टिक वेरी ऑफन, क्योंकि थोड़ा डिस्टेंस है और इतने समय से चल रहा है, तो होना नहीं चाहिए, पर थोड़ा वो नॉर्मलाइजेशन भी हो जाता है कि यहाँ पे तो होता ही है, टेरर अटैक्स होते ही हैं। पर आपने बहुत अच्छी तरह बताया कि आपकी खुद कश्मीरी पंडित कम्युनिटी नहीं लौट पा रही है इसकी वजह से, और ये पूरी दिस इज एक्चुअली अ वेरी वेल कैलिब्रेटेड स्ट्रेटजी दैट इज मेंट टू continue and persist despite all the odds or despite all the challenges. So it's a multi-headed hydra, so to speak. But you're right, grassroots politicians को थोड़ा बहुत हमें सक्षम करना पड़ेगा उनको. We'll have to strengthen them, and you made that point also that PDP हो, कांग्रेस हो, NCP हो, BJP आजकल ज़्यादा target हो रहा है. There is an issue. I mean, there is a way of there is a tendency to undermine democratic processes in the valley through this method. But आपको क्या लगता है, what is the future, to because this violence has been going on for so long, and right now it doesn't seem like it's going to cease. It's of course been tapped down. It's not like what it used to be earlier, but we're still very far away from normalcy. What do you think is the way forward?
देखिए, सरकार ने 2019 अगस्त में ये डिसाइड कर लिया कि अब हम और बर्दाश्त नहीं करने वाले, और उसी साल कुछ महीने पहले हमने ये भी डिसाइड कर लिया कि अगर आप कश्मीर में बहुत बड़ा कोई आतंकवादी हमला करते हैं तो उसका जवाब आपको दो टूक मिलेगा। तो इसलिए हमने बालाकोट पे हमला देखा। तो मुझे लगता है कि सरकार ने अगर इतने महत्वपूर्ण 2 कदम उठाए तो आगे भी उनको महत्वपूर्ण कदम उठाने पड़ेंगे, और ये जमीनी स्तर पर करना पड़ेगा। तो सबसे पहले तो सरकार को आप देखिए एम्प्लॉयमेंट जनरेट करना पड़ेगा। बहुत सारे जो है अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट का प्रॉब्लम है कश्मीर में, जम्मू में भी बहुत जगहों पर। तो जब तक आप एम्प्लॉयमेंट नहीं देंगे, एम्प्लॉयमेंट अपॉर्चुनिटीज पैदा नहीं करेंगे, तब तक जो है लोग, पर्टिकुलरली यूथ जिनके पास कुछ करने को नहीं है, वो गलत धारणाओं की तरफ, ड्रग्स की ओर, आतंकवाद की ओर, वायलेंस की ओर, रेडिकलिज्म की ओर आगे बढ़ते रहेंगे। एम्प्लॉयमेंट हैज टू बी जनरेटेड। सेकंड, आपको जो बाहर से लोग इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर या डेवलपमेंट या पैसा कश्मीर में पंप इन करना चाहते हैं, प्राइवेट इन्वेस्टर्स आना चाहते हैं, उनको आपको सेंस ऑफ सिक्योरिटी देनी पड़ेगी। क्योंकि बहुत सारे इन्वेस्टर्स आना चाहते हैं, लेकिन वो कहते हैं कि अगर आतंकवादी हमला हो गया, अगर हमारे किसी बंदे को मार दिया तो हम क्या करेंगे। तो चाहे वो होटल इंडस्ट्री हो, टूरिज्म हो, हॉस्पिटल्स हो, स्टील प्लांट्स हो, या कुछ भी अब बड़े स्तर पर, या मेडिसिन हो, इवन फ्रूट्स एंड वेजिटेबल्स हो, तो इसको आपको इन्वेस्टमेंट लाना पड़ेगा बड़े स्तर पर, धीरे 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 करके। आप बॉलीवुड को बहुत बड़ा बढ़ावा देना चाहते हैं। मनोज सिन्हा साहब से मैं मिला था पिछले महीने, उन्होंने मुझे बोला कि बहुत सारे बॉलीवुड के डायरेक्टर्स के साथ वो कांटेक्ट में हैं और चाहते हैं कि फिल्में फिर से वहाँ पर शूट हों। इनफैक्ट मैं एक फिल्म डायरेक्टर के साथ वहाँ गया था रेकी करने के लिए। तो बहुत सारे प्रोजेक्ट्स ऐसे वहाँ पर चल रहे हैं और मुझे लगता है कि अगर सेंस ऑफ सिक्योरिटी दी जाए तो वो भी आगे बढ़ेगा और एम्प्लॉयमेंट बढ़ेगा, क्योंकि प्रोडक्शन यूनिट्स आएंगे, लोकल लोग के लिए जनरेशन ऑफ एम्प्लॉयमेंट होगा। तो और लेकिन मैं बार बार ये कह रहा हूँ कि ये तभी होगा जब आप रेडिकलाइजेशन को काउंटर करेंगे। और रेडिकलाइजेशन में क्या कहता हूँ, मैं एक पॉइंट आपको बोलूँ कि साउथ कश्मीर में पर्टिकुलरली बहुत सारी ऐसी मस्जिदें हैं, मॉस्क्स हैं, जहाँ पर हर शुक्रवार, हर जुमा को आप देखते हैं कि प्रेयर्स होती हैं और प्रेयर्स के बाद आधे घंटे, एक घंटे का एक पॉलिटिकल स्पीच दिया जाता है। इस पॉलिटिकल स्पीच में पूरा रेडिकलाइजेशन होता है। आपको बोला जाता है कि आपको जिहाद लड़ना है, और जिहाद किसके खिलाफ लड़ना है? भारत के खिलाफ, क्योंकि आप हिंदुस्तानी नहीं हैं। और आपको सिक्योरिटी फोर्सेस के खिलाफ लड़ना है, आपको पत्थरबाजी करनी है, आपको जो आपके आतंकवादी हैं या संगठन हैं ये सारे, इन सब का समर्थन करना है। तो जब तक भारत की सरकार, भारत का जो सिक्योरिटी इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर है, सिस्टम है, वो सक्षम नहीं होगा इनके खिलाफ सिर्फ कार्रवाई नहीं करने की, बट जो मौलवी साहब हैं हमारे, जो गॉडली फिगर्स हैं, उनको समझाने की कि ये सब नहीं हो सकता। आपको उनको बोलना है कि आपको अच्छी विचारधारा आगे लेके जानी है। अगर आप कुरान प्रीच करना चाहते हैं तो आपको पीस की बातचीत आगे करनी पड़ेगी, आपको ड्रग्स के खिलाफ बोलना पड़ेगा, आपको आतंकवाद, वायलेंस, गोलीबारी, इसके खिलाफ बात करनी पड़ेगी। ये आपकी पॉलिटिकल स्पीच हो सकती है, ये नहीं कि आपको जिहाद लड़ना है या आतंकवाद को समर्थन।
आदित्य, आपके लिए बहुत सवाल आ रहे हैं तो मुझे पूछने पड़ेंगे, क्योंकि लोग कह रहे हैं प्लीज हमारे सवालों के लिए जगह रखिए। तो अनुज चावला जी पूछना चाह रहे हैं कि क्या वजह है कि लोकल पार्टी सरकार में ज्यादा टेररिस्ट एक्टिविटी होती है बजाय गवर्नमेंट रूल के? मुझे समझ में नहीं आया ये सवाल, पर मे बी यू कैन मेक सेंस ऑफ इट।
कैन यू आस्क इट अगेन?
हाँ, वो क्या वजह है कि लोकल पार्टी सरकार में ज्यादा टेररिस्ट एक्टिविटी होती है बजाय गवर्नमेंट रूल के?
Okay, I think we need to move to this next question.
नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन, हाँ मुझे भी समझ में नहीं आया। हाँ, इटर्नल सीकर वांट्स टू आस्क दैट इज दिस an Islamist or the jihadist mindset that is at play, or is it an anti-India sentiment that is at play?
Both actually. क्योंकि असली तो ये इस्लामिस्ट कट्टरपंथी थी, पूरी भावना वहाबिज्म था, वहाबिज्म है। लेकिन पिछले 30 सालों से आपको ये भी देखना पड़ेगा कि देयर इज एन एंटायर जनरेशन दैट हैज कम आउट इन कश्मीर which has only seen guns, which has only seen security forces roaming around their houses, which has only seen bloodshed, which has only seen these radical separatists preach against India. तो वो उस environment में पैदा हुए हैं. So this entire generation thinks that India is the villain here, and you know India is creating all the problems and we have to fight India. तो ये anti India की भावना को generate किया है. So they have a lot of anger in them, and they want to vent out their anger, and that's why we see, even if they come to the top universities in India, right, they even become huge doctors or industrialists or whatever, but inside there is this anger that, you know, it has become a security state. We do not have freedom of movement. We do not have freedom to do anything, even though, you know, they might have been successful in their own careers. And we have seen successful Kashmiri Muslims. I mean, everywhere that I go to India, in all the tourist spots, there is a Kashmiri Muslim, at least 4 to 5 shops, you know, who sell carpets,
Yes,
in all the
yes,
top hospitals, in the top
yes.
hospitals of India, including Apollo, Batra, AIMS, you know, Columbia Asia, Medanta. There are Kashmiris who are doctors, you know, at the very top helm of affairs. So Kashmiris have done very good for themselves against all challenges. But I feel that, you know, you need to do something about this anger. Every time a politician there locally or a activist from Kashmir says that it's a political problem, it's not a political problem. There could be a political solution to it. But there is a tendency of an Islamist expansionism, Islamist terror, and Islamist radicalization, which we have to accept. It is not about dividing Hindus and Muslim. It is not about getting in a communal angle or being communal in this debate. But this is a reality which you have to face in any day.
And you mentioned going with a film director to Kashmir. As you know, I'm a screenwriter myself. I'm surprised that there are no cinema halls allowed in Kashmir. I mean, that was, to me,
Imagine.
came as a real surprise.
And it's not that this has happened, 70 years ago. It has just happened in these 30 years. There were prominent cinemas, if you travel to Kashmir, Advaita, that are still there. I don't remember all the names, but Neelam and some other cinema halls are still intact there. The old buildings are still there. And if you see pictures from 60s and 70s, you will see cinema halls and thousands of people outside.
Right.
Muslims, Pandit, all others watching it together and, competing to go inside first to these cinema halls. But there are no cinema halls now available. Now I'm hopeful. The government says that they're working on a plan to have the first cinema hall in Srinagar. I really hope that this happens, because I remember when there was a plan, I think 3 years back, to have a liquor shop at the Srinagar airport. There was a huge controversy and a hue and cry, because the local population secretly might drink, but it becomes a huge problem if it is done publicly. In Srinagar, there is a shop. In BB Can, there is a shop, but Srinagar airport cannot have that. So it's a hypocrisy. You have to unfortunately change that, and you need to bring in. I'm glad that Kashmir has cafes. पिछले कुछ सालों में बहुत सारे कैफेज जो है खुले हैं जो पहले नहीं थे, तो दैट्स अ वेरी पॉजिटिव डेवलपमेंट. बट मुझे लगता है कैफेज ही क्यों, आपको बार्स भी वहां पर रखने पड़ेंगे, आपको आर्ट थिएटर, आपको सिनेमा हॉल्स वापस लाना पड़ेगा. क्योंकि पिछले कई सालों में अगर आप देखें, कश्मीर में एक लड़कियों का बैंड भी आया था, उनको भी बहिष्कार ऑलमोस्ट कर दिया चरमपंथियों ने. तो बहुत सारी ऐसी चीजें हुई हैं जो ये हुर्रियत के ठेकेदार हैं.
इवन दैट एक्ट्रेस आदित्य वो एक्ट्रेस भी थी ना,
ज़ायरा वसीम.
हाँ.
So Zaira said that she wants to return to her faith and not act. But we know the reality. The society, in a way, forces them to not continue the way they want to. I mean, she was a very successful actress. She got a lot of support. लेकिन सोसाइटी ऐसी है जो प्रेशर करके उसको एकदम 4 कमरों में बंद कर दिया.
Let me get your next question, Aditya. How do you solve Islamic jihad by talking about jobs and investment? Aren't we deluding ourselves, or is it simply a case of political correctness? This is Sanatani First who has asked this question.
No, I'm not saying that Islamist terror needs to be countered with jobs and employment. Security forces have that domain. Security forces are tackling Islamist terror, and they're doing a very fine job. I mean, exceptional job by J&K Police, Indian Army, and the CRPF. But the kind of local involvement of the local population. Now, you can't kill the entire local population. You can't eliminate the local population. Local population needs to be, there needs to be an awareness in them that India wants development. India wants progress. India wants more education. India wants more diversity. And that's what needs to be ingrained there. There hasn't been much effort. I mean, there are many districts in Kashmir which didn't have proper sports facilities till about 2 years back. So, sports needs to be, pushed in. You need to push in,
I'm afraid we may have lost Aditya Kaul because his internet seems to have hung, and see if he's able to come back. And if he can, then we'll continue with our Q&A. I think there's some... Jahangir Gotla has an interesting question. He wants to know, why doesn't the government hold the preachers more accountable? Isn't it time to hold these and their betters accountable beyond just the tap on the wrist? Definitely. I think personally, if you ask me, of course, I have a more of a long distance view on this as opposed to Aditya. But there should be accountability. If you notice, a lot of times when the stone pelting was very aggressive and active, before it was defunded and there was a crackdown on it by the government, a lot of the Fridays after the Friday prayers, you would find the stone pelters come out and spend the next couple of hours pelting stones. So it was definitely a calibrated attempt, and one could see how one situation was leading to the next. So governments have to really come out and say and do more. I think part of the issue has always been, and this has become an international issue. Of course, our first prime minister did take it to the UN, and what happens very often is that there is censure on all levels. I recall the foreign minister of Pakistan actually being interviewed a few days ago on the silence of Pakistan when it came to the Uyghurs in China, because those are one of the most persecuted communities in the world, and absolutely atrocious what happens to them. And they're Uyghur Muslims, and and Pakistan, who gets a lot of aid from China, and has actually practically given up some of its territory also for their sort of Middle Kingdom expansionist plans. That's another conversation. But they never say anything about the Uyghurs. And the foreign minister of Pakistan, this is I think about a week ago, was on CNN, and the journalist asked him straight off. She said, "How come you all don't say anything about the Uyghurs, and you seem to kind of take this stance on everyone else?" And he was flummoxed. He didn't know how to answer that question. And in trying to get out of that question, he immediately turned the conversation, or tried to turn the conversation, to Kashmir. And it's almost become like a monopoly, and you have a get out of jail free card for the Pakistanis. It's really become that for the Pakistani state. Every time they are on the mat, or they are cornered with any question, they pull out the Kashmir card, hoping to divert the conversation and absolve themselves of all the wrongs, whether it be the silence when it comes to the Uyghurs, or what is happening in Balochistan, or cross-border terrorism with India. I think this has become a sort of get out of jail free card for them, unfortunately, and has very little to do with the well-being, of course, of the people of Kashmir, as we're seeing. And I think increasingly, I think that is being exposed, and this government has really done a good job with that, because even when Section 370 was removed, there was this expectation that there would be a bloodbath on the streets, there would be international pressure and commentary, and maybe even worse, maybe people were expecting worse, like what happened when we did our nuclear test, that maybe there would be some sort of restrictions or sanctions or anything of that. But really nothing happened. I think the United States was very clear that this was an internal matter, it was an administrative matter, and that pretty much nipped it in the bud. And yes, there were restrictions in place for some time, and internet restrictions, which are regrettable. But we've even seen in a city like Delhi, I remember during the February 2020 riots in New Delhi, social media was used to mobilize crowds in a very, very obvious way. And it was being done by verified blue tick handles to do that. So in today's time and age, social media, especially when there are sensitive situations involved, can be used to mobilize crowds, can be used to create mischief, to create falsehoods, to spread falsehoods. So there are these decisions that unfortunately governments have to take, whether we like them or not. And unfortunately, this is what happened, and it's absolutely regrettable. And I hope it never happens again as we move closer towards normalcy in the Kashmir Valley. I'm afraid Aditya is having some problem from his server end, and his internet has collapsed. But he won't be able to return to this conversation. But I really would like to take this chance to thank him for being with us. And I really want to thank you all for joining us as well. And we're going to be back, of course, in a few days. Sunday Club is the club that we do with Suhail Seth, Ratan Sharda, and everybody's favorite AIM, or Abhijit Iyer Mitra. And this week we're planning to invite new guest. We're thinking that every Sunday what we'll do is that we'll get a special guest to come in and join, and give some commentary on the news of the day. So that's what we're going to do on this Sunday. Do drop in your questions. Do let us know what you want us to talk about. I think there are a couple of things that we're already interested in. One of the things is slightly light. We like to mix it up. We like to do serious conversations as well as light conversations. So the slightly light conversational topic that we're going to pick is, of course, Rahul Gandhi unfollowing some journalists and some people on his social media on Twitter. What does that mean? Does that mean there is something going on, or is he just doing some digital hygiene? So we're going to really talk about that. Like that, if you'd like to join us and to ask us to discuss other subjects, I think it's important to discuss this whole indemnity thing. We did a conversation on that yesterday. You can check that video out. It's on the playlist. The conversation with really, this was interesting because Pfizer is asking for indemnity, which is essentially that no legal action can be taken against them in the event that their vaccine causes any adverse reactions, which would include death, sickness, what have you, or any kind of permanent disability or illness. They've said that we need to have indemnity because that's what they enjoy in the US as well as in Europe. However, in India, we have 3 vaccines right now, Sputnik 5, Covaxin, as well as Covishield, and none of them enjoy this indemnity. So yesterday we had a great discussion. There was Sohail Seth, Dr. Thadani, who has been running a COVID care center with about 150 of his staff in Mumbai, which was really where this second wave started in Maharashtra. And there was Amit Datta, a lawyer, as well as Abhijit Iyer Mitra. And we discussed whether Pfizer should get indemnity or not. There's, of course, Big Pharma is very good at managing narratives, and Pfizer has been very aggressive about that because India is a huge market. However, post that discussion today, Serum got back and said that, look, if you're going to give indemnity to Pfizer, then why shouldn't we get indemnity? So same rules for everybody. So that's an interesting impasse, say, that we've reached. Will the government say, okay, indemnity for everyone? Or will the government only make the exception for Pfizer? And if they only make the exception for Pfizer, then is that fair to the other companies that are really operating or offering vaccines in India without that indemnity clause? So I think this is going to be something that's going to heat up. Of course, the big pharma wars have been going on for a bit. As you know, the Covishield, or the one that Serum makes, is the same vaccine that is called AstraZeneca abroad, internationally. And AstraZeneca has essentially been blocked from the United States. And we can all see why that's happening, because I'm sure Pfizer must have exercised some muscle. And so it's going to be interesting. Is this payback time? Is that why they're doing this? Or do they really think that they should be same rules for all? It sounds fair, but then can the government afford to do that? Remember, these vaccines, especially the mRNA vaccine, I was speaking to a friend in the US who has not taken the vaccine as yet because she just feels that that maybe we just don't know enough about this. This is new technology. There's some sort of DNA manipulation that takes place. The long-term effects of it are not clear as yet. So, there are all kinds of questions. I've personally gotten vaccinated myself. I've done the doses, and I think it's important to get vaccinated, especially when we saw what happened with the second dose. But there are these conversations happening in America, wherein people have the option to take it or not take it, or take this one and not that one. So these are the kind of calibrations they're making. The other is, of course, the controversy over ivermectin, which is part of the COVID protocol medication, and there seems to be some thought that this medication works very well, but on the other hand, medical bodies are saying not to use this medication. So I'm going on and on, but essentially, I think this whole vaccine situation in the present time is very interesting, and it's definitely something that we want to discuss and talk about a little more. And if there's anything else that you'd like us to for us to bring up, then please do let us know. We like to keep it constructive. We do read your comments. We do like to, get your feedback. We've only been on air or on YouTube really consistently for the last 1 month. So there's still a lot of things we're learning about how to do this. I'm certainly not a professional journalist. I am curious by nature, and I have good friends who seem to have an insight into very complex issues, and I like to bring them out to the forefront so that we can essentially just have a freewheeling conversation without agenda, without any kind of leanings or trying to push a certain viewpoint forward. And our aim is really India first. I know a lot of people say that, but we really want to keep it at that. We want to do India first, and we want to also have the freedom to criticize who we want to criticize, because I think governments only get stronger even the ones you support, if you give them constructive criticism. So thank you all for watching. And that's really the end of my monologue. And I appreciate that for listening. I see some of you, you're still hanging around listening to it. So it couldn't have been that bad. But like we said, we're work in progress. So have a great evening, and I shall catch you on the other side. Many thanks to Aditya